My name is Mike Terrill. For those of you that don't know me, I've been around a little bit. I'm actually older than Johan, so
1 year.
one year. Yeah. And I'm his chauffeur this week, so that's my claim to fame. I joined Two Pint Software back in November. Prior to that, I was at a big bank, as most of you may know. So been doing this probably 26, 7 years, something like that. Too long to remember. So today we're going to talk a bit about some things that are kind of been coming up lately, and some things yet that will come up that you need to kind of plan and prepare for. Obviously, Johan and Michael and I were very much into OSD stuff and loading Windows, and that's been a thing for a long time, and it'll be a thing for a long time to come as long as Windows is around. But there's different ways of doing it. So really fundamentally is the disk partitioning. Now this kind of changed with this whole UEFI, which a lot of people mispronounce as UFI.
Bold statement.
Stand by it.
I think we need to hit the share button on that little side thing. You know, bottom right.
Bottom right. Oh, this one.
Yeah, it should just happen. Let's see. Oh, I mean, you
There.
Now you got the red box.
okay, good. You should see it now.
Yep. All right. So the first couple slides, you guys didn't really miss anything. But disk partitioning. So back in, well, when Windows 10 was about to come out, there was all this talk about UEFI because a lot of people didn't go to Windows 8 and they didn't do Windows 7 in UEFI. And that caused a lot of scrambling because people wanted to take advantage of some of the advanced security features that were required in order you needed UEFI, which means you needed a new disk partition. And we did a lot of work back in those days to do BIOS to UEFI stuff before Microsoft decided that it was actually important. And then they later came out with an MBR to GPT tool that kind of helped out in some of those situations. But long story short is they came out with this recommendation of a disk layout back around that time frame. So I've had multiple people come to me. I think in the Denver user group, I was there once, and someone was having some issues with their system partition. It was a bit too small for things. It was causing some problems that they needed to overcome, and the system partition kind of tricky. We've had some issues with recovery partitions lately. Also, when doing in-place upgrades, if that recovery partition wasn't typed appropriately, you'd end up with 2 recovery partitions in an in-place upgrade, and one would be non-functional. That was more of just an annoyance than something that, you know, was a blocker to anything. But that's when I really started to look at this as, all right, what do we need to do to get there and to do it right? I think in 2019, where's Segura? Yeah, there's Segura. He was in a thread with myself and Gary Block. For those of you that know Gary, and we were talking about this very thing and what recommendations we had. Well, it comes down to the fact that the disk partitioning has been all over the place over all these years. If you have a very consistent build process and you've followed a good disk partition layout, then you probably don't have many of these problems unless you made things too small. Depending on how it was installed could determine how the disk was formatted. So if you just used whatever config manager put in there for disk partitioning in the early days, or whatever MDT did, you might see a recovery partition at the front of the disk, because that was kind of the recommendation back in the Windows 8 and earlier days. If you install off of like the ISO, I do to do smoke testing and things like that quite a bit. But the built-in setup engine has its own disk partitioning layouts. And then anybody using autopilot in here today? A couple people, yeah. So you're at the mercy of the OEMs, hoping that the OEMs actually get the disk partitioning laid out correctly. I don't know what kind of flexibility do they allow you guys to dictate what you want for partition layouts if you're not doing a custom image?
We never asked.
Never ask.
The answer's no.
No. Okay. Yep. So that's another thing to be conscious of. Cloud PC. Anybody running Windows 365 cloud PCs in here? Yeah. Those are interesting, and I got to speak to Christian earlier today, or earlier this week rather, about some of those partitionings, and they're kind of at the mercy of the engine that spins those things up. So I think, as Johan mentioned earlier, in-place upgrades, we all love those. Those were great, and we've been spoiled the last couple of years with the EKBs, but those are coming back. So it's important that these disk partitions get created appropriately. I listed off some error codes and some KB articles. Seeing some interesting things there. But first, let's start with Windows 10. So this also came up on Twitter, or X as we call it now. Someone had posted a really weird disk partitioning layout where the recovery partition was not actually like this, but it did drive me to go back and download the Windows 10 ISOs that I had previously deleted and start going through and installing them all. And what I first noticed was, I think I went all the way back to 1507. They didn't even follow their own recommendation, Microsoft. They kept the recovery partition at the front. So this is just off the ISO, boot a VM, next to the setup engine, answer 1 for the partition or the password reminders, that kind of thing, and pop it open and see what it looks like. Before I go too far, does anybody know if they ever fixed this, and if so, what version they fixed it in? No, because this is boring stuff that people don't pay attention to until it bites them. So it actually wasn't until 2004 that they fixed this and they put the recovery partition towards the back. So the reason why they put the recovery partition in the back, and the reason why they came out with that recommendation in the first place, was during an in-place upgrade, the setup could dynamically grow and shrink that recovery partition as it needed to. It can't do it so easily if it's sitting at the front of the disk. So this is okay, but now we're starting to see some issues. I like to pay close attention to sizes of both the system partition or EFI partition, as well as the recovery partition. So CM partitioning, they've had it this way. I forget what build this was. It might have been the current build I took this screenshot from. And this is okay, except for when you have very large disks. So they didn't really put a lot of flexibility into making the size of the recovery partition. So if you have a really super large disk, you end up with a really super large recovery partition, and your chances are you're wasting some space there. So this is an OEM partition from Dell, and I was like, this is interesting. I see 2 recovery partitions on here. What's that all about? This is right out of the box. Well, the OEMs, they like to create their own recovery partitions sometimes and put their own recovery tools on them. But what I found bad about this one is they use the same type ID that's reserved for the Microsoft recovery partition. So I could see this presenting some issues down the road in your in-place upgrade scenario, or if you need to patch something that's sitting on that recovery partition. How's the patch going to know what the correct recovery partition is? Things of that sort. So yeah, I'd start checking like some of your stuff that you're getting for autopilot to see what kind of partition layouts that they're putting down. Windows 365, there was another tweet that came out from John Markham. He was running into an issue on his cloud PC. So I decided to look and see what my cloud PC had, and sure enough, it's got a 450 meg partition, which is actually the recovery partition at the front. It's just not labeled correctly. So that's another variance you can have. It's not being properly labeled. So by now you're going into pizza coma, and you're probably wondering, this is great and all, but why does it actually matter? So if you haven't hit any of these issues, you can see errors like this. We couldn't update the system partition when you're trying to upgrade Windows 10. That was a real thing. This came, I think the system partition is a bit too small, and at the time, it needed like 15 megs to actually do the upgrade. I actually saw this previously, and this was on machines that had a 200 meg system partition, and they had less than 15 meg free. So that presented some real challenges. I think there is a Microsoft article out there that says you can go through and delete like font files and things like that to try to free up the space. But that's just kind of kicking the can down the road, in my opinion. But this is very important why you should make the system partition even bigger. The other thing that we found is manufacturers, certain manufacturers. I know HP for sure is one of them because we spoke to them about it. But they'll actually use the system partition to do firmware upgrades. So whether it's the actual BIOS firmware or the camera firmware or any other device that has firmware that needs to be updated, they'll write to that because it's typically unencrypted. Well, it is unencrypted if your rest of your disk is. So they need to be able to read and write to that when they're offline. And that's why they'll stage stuff there. So it's important to make that as big as possible. Recovery environment. This is one that just recently came up. Starting in January, they've released an update, and a lot of people were getting this particular error message. So in this particular case, this addresses the CVE for Windows RE as it relates to BitLocker, and they needed to be able to patch WinRE. And if you had less than a certain amount of disk space on your recovery partition, they couldn't patch it, and you ended up with this particular error. And then lastly, even if you had a recovery partition that wasn't being used, like on the cloud PCs, John Markham's tweet here, this was exactly it. So there was some either bad logic in that patch or something like that. So it was causing the same error on cloud PCs, even though they don't really utilize that recovery partition. And then same thing on server. For those of you that manage servers, Jeremy had the same issue here. So it's important if you are managing servers and doing OSD for servers, make sure that those disks are set out the same way too. So as we recommended back in, I think it was 2019, that little conversation that Segura and Gary and I had, Gary produced a nice blog post, published it, we made it our recommendation. And for those of you that have been following it, you probably haven't had any of these problems. There's a question?
Oh, I was just going to say it's a fantastic blog post and it's super helpful.
Oh, thank you. Well, thanks to Gary, he wrote it up. I'll have to see if he updated it, because I've actually used 984. So if you've searched on the hashtag 984, I think that was what Segura came up with. And so I set them both to 984. I haven't had a need to go bigger. If you do start stuffing additional languages and things like that in WinRE and you bloat it up, you might want to make it a little bit bigger to handle those particular circumstances. But there's a reason for not going over, which is VSS or volume shadow copy. And I think they recommend having it, if you go over a gig, to have at least a gig free disk space. So now you just took your recovery partition from maybe just under a gig to 2 gigs in size to accommodate for that. So But with this, I do things in modules, and that way we could just take and put this in other task sequences we use, and we don't have to remember to create all these steps manually, whatnot. So I will show where that module is in a second. So with that, detecting and recovery partition issues, did anybody run into that issue by chance, or knowingly run into that issue? No?
Yeah, I mean, I had a couple servers that wouldn't do the Windows update, because it was too small. So yeah, I mean, and the error messages, as we've all documented on Twitter, are not exactly helpful.
Yep. So you could do it a couple ways. You find devices that aren't upgrading, and you get a cryptic error message, and you're like, WTF, and then you find the answer that it's this patch. You can go look for it by using Configuration Manager, or you can write some PowerShell scripts and send them out through Intune remediation. Look for things that way. So there are a few things. And with that, switch over to demo real quick. And remember my fancy key combination here. Trying something new, Johan. So you gotta keep me straight. All right, so what we said about config manager was it kind of gets us like 90% of the way there, and then we end up with really large recovery partitions. So basically what I did was, all right, let's let config manager create the first 3 partitions, and then we're going to dynamically create the recovery partition ourselves. So this is just basically nothing more than some script that will come in and actually set it. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, it kind of looks like it's in PowerShell, but you're also piping it out to disk part. I mentioned that I was getting old at the beginning of the presentation. The reason is the commandlets don't allow you to specify the recovery partition type in Windows PE. That's missing. I discovered that once, and then I forgot about it and said, I really need to rewrite this to make it native, and then found out that that was the case. So if you're wondering why it pipes out to disk part, is because what you need in WinPE is not there, and you want to run this in Windows PE. So basically what this will do is it'll take the Windows partition, it'll shrink it down 984 meg, and then create a recovery partition right behind it with the appropriate type and everything. So I did recently find an issue after playing with some patched Windows PE media where the disk index isn't getting discovered properly. I have a suspicion I know what's causing the issue. So if you do run into that, that might be why this wouldn't work correctly. But patching Windows PE, as we'll see here in a little bit, is kind of critical. So this is actually on. I think Johan pointed out our GitHub earlier, 2Pint GitHub. So we do have a section for Configuration Manager. And so it's been starting to just publish some of these useful modules up there. Download it, play with it, test it, modify it, do whatever, but it should help get you on the right track. So now for the recovery partition stuff, what we could do is we can look at a device level. If we look at something like Win32, we'll see this one actually doesn't have any labels here, but you can get free disk space. So that's the only downside to this, is it becomes a very tricky problem because you need to start looking at specific disk types. And if you haven't set the recovery partitions up correctly, you're not going to know exactly what's out there. So if we wanted to get this, oh, actually one other thing here is if we run this, yeah. So we could see what our WinRE version is and how much free space we have here. And I think on this particular one, this was an interesting one because I was having a heck of a time trying to repro this issue. But as you can see here, this was the actual KB that failed. That's what Hoyte saw on his servers, and he was wondering why that didn't happen. So that's one way to see this. I don't think they ever published this into WSUS or config manager, so it's probably where a lot of people didn't see it. And I think they kind of held off on it and working on some type of resolution for it. They did publish a few blog posts on it, on like actually how to fix it. There's like a PowerShell script and some other things. I'll show another one real quick on how to fix it from a member in the community. But if we want to look at configuration manager, close for this out. That WMI class that I hit was volume, Win32 volume. So Johan and I had this discussion, I think when this started to become a hot topic. And you can come into hardware inventory, and this isn't on by default because I think he checked on one of his generic sites. But if you look for Win32 volume, you can start pulling information about the volumes, and then that becomes one way to run queries and things like that. Like I said, you can do a PowerShell script and send it out through Intune, proactive remediations, to kind of get some of that information back. But it does become tricky if your partitions are all out of whack. Once you do have that information, then you can easily query against it, see what your free space is, and see which machines might need some help. So. All right. So Microsoft published a link to the KB that I sent out. These are all hyperlinked. I'm gonna make these available to AZSmug because I actually gave this at my user group a couple weeks ago, and I'll share them through Greg as well. That way you can hit these links and not have to write them down or anything. Martin Himkin, shout out to him. I know Johan and we talked to him a bit over Twitter, and he's been working on that solution. He came out with a really good script, which I'll show here in a second. Our colleague Niall Brady, he also wrote a pretty big blog post on the issue as well. So I thought that there was no use recreating the wheel since these guys have both done things that will actually, they do a little more comprehensive job than like what Microsoft KB does in terms of making a backup. You have to disable WinRE. When you do that, it's going to bring the WinRE.wim back onto the C drive. If you start messing with the partition before you disable it, good luck. It might not work so well. But these guys have done a load of work in there that put different safeguards in there to do it. So let's go back. So for this particular one, as we can see here in disk management, it's got, I wouldn't really say 546 is that small, but that KB was actually calling out for 250 megs free. I'm not sure exactly how they're updating it on the fly. I haven't looked into that level of detail, but WinRE can get pretty big. So probably part of the reason why they need the additional space there. Let's see for his thing. So he's got this pretty well documented. It's out on GitHub. And it takes various switches. You can run it interactively. You can run it so that it spits out different things. I was going to give him a little advice or recommendation that instead of making it in gig, maybe make it in meg so that we can create it less than 1 gig because we really don't want to go over that size limit. But if you do have any issues, he's actually very helpful and will reply to you. And he does a fantastic job logging everything. It goes through and it makes a backup before it removes it. And then it'll actually tell you the current size going forward. So now if we go back in here, we should see that that's magically changed to 1 gig in size. Question?
Martin MK says, thanks for the call out.
Oh,
Great message to.
He's got the button.
awesome. Yeah, tell him fantastic job. So definitely. I know he's put a lot of work into it. As you can see, this script is 1,100 lines. So it'll save you a ton of time using this. But yep. All right. Any questions on the WinRE stuff? No. Apparently you can't switch desktops when you're in a VM. All right, Windows Boot Manager Revocations. Who's heard of Black Lotus? No, you're not allowed to answer, Johan. All right, so Black Lotus, I think it came out last May timeframe, so it's been about a year. Basically, they got access to some secure boot certificates, and they started exploiting those secure boot. So Microsoft has come out with the boot manager revocations list. Well, as you can imagine, once you apply this, your systems aren't going to boot. So there's kind of several dependencies that come in play with this particular fix. And what Microsoft has done is they've laid a timeline out. So they initially started back in May. You had to have an update. Well, if you read the article, I think one date says May, and then another date for patch after July. I would just go with the one after July. But now that we're into 2024, you should be clearly off of those, and the newer stuff that you're on should just work. Now, what you have to do is you have to update your boot media, any recovery media. If you use OEM media, hopefully they're working on those, like the Dells and the Lenovo's and the HPs, because once you do this, the system is not going to boot. However, it's not a last resort. You can actually disable secure boot, and then you will be able to boot the system. But since this writes it into the forbidden list, that's actually in firmware. I was going to have a demo for you guys on this with a VM, and I started running through this for the group I gave a couple weeks ago. And it's interesting because even it does weird things to the Hyper-V VMs. Trying to revert back to an earlier point in time after applying these was no good. It was very weird results. So I would do some physical testing on a couple of hardware devices if you need to, because once you set it, you're not going to be able to load some of the older media. But that's what you can do is you can take a couple desktops or laptops, apply this, enforce it, and then boot your media. Just go through and boot as much media as you need to boot, and then that way you can make sure that you're ready. So what this means is if you do get the WinRE patch to apply that was given everybody fits that I just talked about, that will be able to boot against the forbidden list because that'll be updated, as of like January timeframe. So you'll be okay there. I think Johan was talking about Windows PE earlier in his presentation, and I don't know if you gave Greg his copy of Windows PE.
I'll burn it on a CD for him.
Okay. But there's ways to actually, you want to make sure that WinPE is updated as well. If you're still running Windows 10, it's going to be an earlier version of that 80K. Microsoft did come out with a, what do they call it, a 23H2 update 80K, which is not even based on Windows 11 23H2. I don't recommend using that one. I would wait, or I would patch your version of Windows 11 that you're actually using. So what do these timelines mean? Well, April 9th is coming up relatively soon. And what's funny is they always say enforcement no sooner than October 8th. So October 8th could be a very bad day for people that have ignored this for the last year. Well, it'll be a year and a half by then. But that's basically Microsoft's way of saying, you know what, we're actually going to go ahead and flip that switch for you. You won't have any choice. So I imagine October 8th is a patch Tuesday, and that's when they'll do it, unless somebody gets nervous and decides to push that date out. But the sooner you can get this done, the better, because you're going to be more secure from some of those attacks and whatnot. And with that, so I can demo one thing, which is actually the enforcement here. So this is the actual KB, and I got a link to it in the article. But basically, they went through and did a few things. So you actually had to update some files on the EFI file during the or on the EFI partition during the initial deployment. Now, after doing that, then if you actually did want to enforce it, you can basically drop this registry key here. And once this registry key happens, you need to restart the device, wait 5 minutes, and then verify that it is applied correctly. So after a second restart. So you can do this in a phased rollout if you decide to go ahead and deploy it to your fleet, that kind of thing. And 1 or 2 reboots later, then they should be good to go to apply it. But just keep in mind, if they need to boot to alternate media, I'm not sure how well the people with third-party disk encryption that might have other bootloaders, if they've accommodated their updates for their booting mechanisms. Some use Linux and other things, other interesting OSs to boot. So basically test thoroughly if any of those are in your wheelhouse. So, but with that, yeah, what we can do is we can go ahead and apply this particular registry key. And I forget if, so there's a couple places to look in the event viewer here. So we should see 2 events. And let me go ahead and reboot this one really quickly. So this is the actual event that we're looking for, which is 1035. So hopefully you can see that. I need to make it bigger. But you see that secure boot DBX update applied successfully to this one. So basically we want to wait a few minutes and then have a second reboot, and then it should be good to go. And it basically shouldn't be able to boot any unpatched boot media, whether it be WinPE or WinRE or OEM tools, that kind of thing. So the other one and is going to be in a different part of the registry. under kernel boot. So this one is going to be event ID 276, but I think this is the one that actually needs that second reboot. So we can try to speed it up and see. I'm not sure exactly what the exactly 5 minutes or less than 5 minutes kind of thing is, but how that actually comes into play. Maybe they give some time to actually updating some of the EFI stuff in the background. Now, a couple things to note. We talked a bit about WinPE earlier and updating Windows PE. So you can update, you can apply offline patches to Windows PE just like you do using OST Builder to apply to the WIM. But, and I think Gary has a nice blog out there on it. Actually, I think he's got 2 blogs out there on it because Gary's like an overachiever in this space. And he wrote this one right when it first came out, so actually shows you unpatched. He was booting here into VMware or Hyper-V, and it didn't boot properly. But what you want to do is you want to make sure you add any optional components ahead of time. The optional components, and before you actually do the patching. So if you're using Config Manager or MDT, anybody still use MDT in here? Oh, I know you do, Yon. Yeah. They require certain WinPE optional components. There is a whole, I would say, order that they need to be installed in. So you're probably thinking like, well, I can just go in and tick the box and add like PowerShell and .NET and those things, and then it handles the order for you, which is great and all. And I had this conversation with Carrie. Is just like the way Segura has done OSD Builder, is there is an order of operations that needs to happen. So if you do add optional components afterwards, so say you left PowerShell off of servicing Windows PE, you let Config Manager do it. I've run into some bizarre errors, and I think I lost about a half day on it. So that's why I decided to go through and build in any optional component I want. Now, when you add that into Config Manager or MDT, it's going to see that those OCs are already there. It's not going to try to re-add them. But there is a nice little article. They did do a pretty good job of documenting this. And I did try to tweet this out recently, but it's specifically this line. Make sure to manually add this instead of adding them this way, because you'll get some weird results, basically. Or you could get some weird results. And they have a whole list of them here. So just kind of keep that in mind when you start doing this. Or you could cheat and use that newer 80K. Maybe we'll see a 80K for 24H2 relatively soon. I'm not sure what the timelines are on that, but I imagine they're going to start putting one out, and then hopefully it works the first time this time around. So, but let's go back to this guy and see if we see that log update. I'll boot. And this is the one we're looking for right here, which is 276. And we see that the revocation policy has been applied. So particular VM is now safe from that exploit. This is really what you want to look for when you go to patch this. So any questions on this?
So even if, I guess until October 8th, even if we're doing a clean install with an updated media, it won't, that revocation list won't necessarily be applied, right?
It won't be enforced, yeah. Yeah. You know, I'm not sure what, let's see what April, let's see what the April date was on that one. Take action, blah, blah, blah. Oh, wait, that's the wrong one. This one here. Second. They just say that they're going to add additional boot manager mitigations. So not really sure what that means. I think I was told to like look and read the KBs for the April patches that come out. So maybe they'll provide us with some more information, or where all the Patch My PC guys go? Do they just come for pizza? they they might look into that. So I know they comb through these things pretty good. But yeah, who knows? It's still a little bit mysterious of what they're going to do on April 9th, but October 8th is when they're gonna make that permanent. So maybe, well, no sooner than is there. So
Well, and that's, I guess, so some of us may not realize our WinPE images are not quite right until we try to image a machine that has this update after October 8th, you know.
right. Yeah, that's why I say like jump on this now, because October 8th could be a bad day for people for that week.
Maybe that's the release date of 11/24H2.
Yeah. Two big things to just make sure you get on top of next time you get a little downtime. I know that's not always easy. Any other questions? Okay. All right, the last thing I want to talk to you about is another interesting thing that they forget what month this one came out, was domain join hardening. So for those of you legacy non-modern folks who still join Active Directory, there were some CVs around joining accounts. As you may know, like whatever account you join with basically owns that computer object. And if you use the same account for everything and that gets compromised, that's bad news. So they're doing a few things in place here to make sure that it's not as easy, and a new account can't necessarily join a machine. Yeah. So they do have a provision that's put in place, which is called net join legacy account reuse. At least they say they're removing it in August. So they're going to hit us in August, and then they'll hit us in October. So. But this particular one, what they could do is you have a workaround right now, and you will see an error in the net setup log when it tries to do this. Basically, they give you this ability to create this registry key. So if you haven't implemented this yet, and there is a GPO and a group that you can apply to whatever your service accounts are that you use for this. If it doesn't have those particular permissions, then it won't be able to join a machine that's been joined under a different service account, and this is going to error out and throw this particular event ID here. So you want to make sure that you do this. One kind of alternative that we've been working on is actually starting things a little bit cleaner also. So when you do go to rebuild a machine, in our process that we've created is we actually would look to see if it's in CM, and we would delete it out of CM. If it's in Active Directory, we'll delete it out of Active Directory, all automated on the server side. And then when it goes to rejoin, then it doesn't necessarily shouldn't hit this issue if it's been deleted properly. But this is something that you probably want to get on top of as well, because then all of a sudden, if you don't know what's out there, all of a sudden people are building machines and then they're not joining the domain and you're kind of scrambling, reading logs and trying to figure out what's going on. So, yeah, so this one, and I got a link to this as well, but there's actually a policy here. Allow computer account reuse during domain join. Who actually changes the machine account owners after they're joined to Active Directory?
We just started a little bit after this.
Okay. A+ for you, Kathy. Anyone else?
We're still having, I'm worried about what they're going to kick in. That's going to break it because we are using workaround a lot.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think it's a good idea because those service accounts, even if you do least privilege on those service accounts, once they get compromised, it's the owner of all the objects in Active Directory and might as well be a domain admin at that point. So, so it's a good thing to do. But yeah. All right, and that's all I had actually. So any questions, any other questions?
You said you were having a process to remove computers from SCCM and AV. What is that, like a script that your techs run? Do you do it during the imaging process? Is it manual? What's that looking like for you?
Yeah, so it uses some of our software. We have a version of iPixie that we use, and so when it boots to the web service makes the calls and removes the stuff that way. Yeah, it's proprietary.
Okay, that's part of what I'm curious about. Now, how are you creating the account in Active Directory and where does it get created? Because we're required to pre-stage accounts, and just the mere fact that you pre-staged it means that it's an existing account.
Okay, so you're pre-creating the accounts before you join.
Before we image it, before we join it to the domain, we pre-created an Active Directory, so it's in the right zone. You don't run into the limitation that I thought used to exist, that unless you had certain permissions, you could only add and join 10 computers to the domain. I don't remember it's been so long that we dealt with that.
Oh, yeah. There's a group policy that you can set to put that up, right?
Both in general, we recommend customers to not pre-create data accounts, but allow the domain join process do that part.
Great, and are you able to, where are you putting it in the building structure then?
You can have a web service that asks for an OU
Okay.
or even move it with an OU if needed. Some customers, they will have a front end that will prompt for which OU it's supposed to go into. Other ones are generating that information, but it's doable to do.
Look at that, this, yeah.
You can also set an OU to be the default one. If it doesn't exist, it'll go into that default OU.
Right, we don't give anybody rights to that default computer, so you.